Specialist Hannah Parker steadied her breathing at the 300-meter firing line on Fort Carson's Range 14, the Colorado morning sun casting long shadows across the dusty ground at 7 a.m. Her M4 carbine felt foreign in her hands, despite months of training, and the familiar weight that should have brought comfort instead triggered a cascade of self-doubt that made her fingers tremble slightly against the trigger guard. Which city are you watching from? Share it in the comments. Maybe someone else from your city is here too. And if you believe heroes can appear in the most unexpected ways, hit subscribe and give this video a like. Around her, 32 soldiers from 3rd Platoon Alpha Company lay in the prone position, their rifles pointed downrange toward the pop-up targets that would determine their quarterly marksmanship qualifications. Hannah could hear the quiet confidence in their breathing patterns, the steady rhythm of soldiers who had found their groove with military marksmanship. She envied that confidence more than they could possibly know. Staff Sergeant Martinez walked behind the firing line, his combat boots crunching on the gravel as he made final checks before the qualification began. When he reached Hannah's position, he paused longer than necessary, his expression a mixture of concern and barely concealed frustration. "Parker," he said quietly, leaning down so only she could hear. "You know this is your 3rd attempt, right? Battalion's breathing down my neck about our platoon scores. I need you to qualify today." Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. The pressure was suffocating. For 6 months at Fort Carson, she had struggled with every aspect of military marksmanship while watching soldiers with far less shooting experience excel at skills that should have been second nature to her. The irony was killing her slowly. "I understand, Staff Sergeant," she managed to whisper back. Martinez studied her face, looking for some sign of the confidence he needed to see. Instead, he saw the same anxiety and self-doubt that had plagued Hannah since arriving at Fort Carson from advanced individual training. "Parker, just remember what we practiced. Breathe, aim, squeeze. Don't overthink it." But Hannah was already overthinking everything. As Martinez moved on to the next soldier, she closed her eyes and tried to push down the memories that always surfaced during shooting exercises. The memories of another life, another identity, another Hannah who could make impossible shots look effortless. The qualification began with targets at 50 meters. Hannah's first shot missed completely, the bullet impacting the dirt berm behind the target with a small puff of dust. Her second shot clipped the edge of the silhouette, barely qualifying as a hit. By the time the 50-meter course was complete, she had managed only 3 hits out of 10 attempts. Private Collins, lying in the position next to her, glanced over with obvious confusion. "Parker, how are you missing these shots? They're practically point-blank range." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Just having an off day," she lied, chambering another round as the target shifted to 100 meters. But it wasn't an off day. It was the same problem she'd been fighting for months. Every time Hannah tried to apply military marksmanship techniques, her muscle memory rebelled. Her body wanted to move with the fluid speed of competition shooting, to acquire targets rapidly and fire multiple shots in tight succession. The deliberate, methodical pace of military qualification felt like swimming upstream against years of ingrained training. The 100-meter targets proved even more challenging. Hannah's shots scattered around the silhouette like she was using a shotgun instead of a rifle. By the end of the string, she had managed only 2 clean hits out of 10 shots. The soldiers around her were scoring consistent hits, their confidence growing with each successful engagement. Staff Sergeant Martinez was taking notes on his clipboard, and Hannah could see the growing concern in his expression. A soldier who couldn't qualify with basic marksmanship skills was a liability to the unit and a reflection on his leadership as a trainer. During the break before the 200-meter targets, Martinez called Hannah aside. "Parker, what's going on out there? Your shots are all over the place, and your fundamentals look solid during dry-fire practice." Hannah stared at the ground, unable to meet his eyes. "Staff Sergeant, I don't know. I think I'm just nervous about qualifying." Martinez softened his tone slightly. "Look, I know there's pressure, but you've got to find a way to settle down. The 300-meter targets are coming up, and those are the hardest shots of the qualification. If you don't start connecting soon, you're going to fail again." Hannah nodded miserably. She knew exactly what was wrong, but she couldn't explain it without revealing the truth about her background. The truth that she had deliberately hidden from everyone at Fort Carson, including the recruiters who had processed her enlistment. The 200-meter course was a disaster. Hannah managed only one confirmed hit out of 10 shots, and even that was a barely qualifying impact on the outer edge of the silhouette. She could hear whispered conversations among the other soldiers, speculation about how someone could be so bad at such a basic military skill. Maybe she's never shot before, someone muttered behind her. How did she make it through basic training? Another voice wondered. Hannah wanted to disappear. Every missed shot felt like a betrayal of abilities she had spent years developing, skills that had once made her one of the most respected competitive shooters in the country. But those skills belonged to a different person, a different life that she had deliberately left behind when she decided to serve her country. The transition to 300-meter targets brought a new level of difficulty. The silhouettes were smaller, the wind effects more pronounced, and the margin for error nearly non-existent. Hannah settled into the prone position for what she knew would be her final opportunity to salvage something from this qualification attempt. Her first shot missed by 2 feet, impacting the dirt well to the left of the target. Her second shot flew high, disappearing into the berm without touching the silhouette. By her fifth shot, she had not recorded a single hit at 300 meters. That's when Staff Sergeant Martinez made a decision that would change everything. "Parker, step back from the line," he called out, his voice carrying across the range with military authority. Hannah saved her weapon and stood up, knowing that her military career was effectively over. 3 failed qualification attempts would result in remedial training, possible reassignment, and the kind of career damage that few soldiers recovered from. But Martinez wasn't giving up on her yet. "Parker, walk with me," he said, leading her away from the other soldiers toward the range equipment shed. Once they were out of earshot, he turned to face her directly. "Okay, Parker, I've been watching you for 6 months, and something doesn't add up. Your weapon handling is flawless. Your shooting positions are textbook perfect. Your breathing control is better than most of my experienced marksmen, but you can't hit a target to save your life." Hannah remained silent, not sure where this conversation was heading. Martinez continued, "I've seen nervous shooters and I've seen incompetent shooters. You're neither. You move like someone who knows weapons intimately, but you shoot like someone who's fighting against their own instincts." Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. Martinez was more observant than she had given him credit for. "Staff Sergeant, I'm just not good at this," she said weakly. Martinez shook his head. "Bullshit. There's something you're not telling me." He paused, studying her face carefully. "Parker, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a straight answer. Have you shot competitively before enlisting?" The question hit Hannah like a physical blow. She had been dreading this moment for months, knowing that eventually someone would notice the inconsistencies in her performance. "Staff Sergeant, Parker," Martinez interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind, "I'm trying to help you here, but I can't fix a problem if I don't understand what's causing it." Hannah looked around the range, at the soldiers who were continuing their qualification, at the targets that represented everything she was failing to achieve in her military career. Then she made a decision that would expose everything she had been hiding. "Staff Sergeant, yes, I shot competitively before I enlisted." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "What kind of competitive shooting?" Hannah took a deep breath. 3-gun competition, USPSA matches, I was pretty good at it." "How good?" Hannah hesitated, then pulled up the sleeve of her Army combat uniform. Beneath the fabric, partially hidden by a flesh-colored bandage, was a tattoo that made Martinez's eyes widen in recognition. The tattoo showed a stylized competition pistol overlaid with multicolored geometric shapes, surrounded by the letters USPSA and the words Grand Master in flowing script. Below the main design were 3 smaller symbols representing pistol, rifle, and shotgun competition. Martinez stared at the tattoo in disbelief. "Parker, are you telling me you're a Grand Master in 3-gun competition?" Hannah nodded miserably. "Yes, Staff Sergeant. I competed on the national circuit for 5 years before I enlisted." "Jesus Christ, Parker! Grandmasters are the top 1% of competitive shooters in the country. Why the hell are you failing basic marksmanship qualification?" Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because competitive shooting and military marksmanship are completely different animals, Staff Sergeant. Everything I learned in competition is working against me here." Martinez was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. "Explain that to me." Hannah gathered her thoughts, knowing she was about to reveal years of internal struggle. "In competition, speed is everything. You acquire targets rapidly, Fire multiple shots quickly and move constantly. The muscle memory is all about fluid motion and rapid engagement. She gestured toward the range where the other soldiers were still shooting. Military marksmanship is about patience, deliberate shot placement, and methodical target engagement. Every time I try to slow down and be methodical, my competition training fights against it. I end up overthinking every shot and second-guessing my instincts. Martinez nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. So you're essentially fighting against years of highly trained muscle memory every time you pull the trigger. Exactly, Staff Sergeant. In competition, I could put 5 rounds into a 6-inch circle at 300 yards in under 8 seconds. But ask me to take one careful, deliberate shot at the same target, and I fall apart because I'm fighting against my own training. Martinez was quiet for several minutes, staring at Hannah's tattoo and considering the implications. Finally, he spoke. Parker, why didn't you tell anyone about this background when you enlisted? The Army could have used your skills in marksmanship instruction or special operations. Hannah's expression darkened. Because I didn't want to be defined by my shooting skills, Staff Sergeant. I wanted to serve my country as a regular soldier, not as some kind of shooting specialist. I thought I could adapt my competition skills to military requirements. But you can't. No, Staff Sergeant, I can't. Every attempt to shoot slowly and methodically feels wrong. My competition instincts take over, and I end up rushing shots or overthinking the process. Martinez made a decision that would transform not just Hannah's military career, but the entire approach to marksmanship training for 3rd Platoon. Parker, I want you to try something completely different. Instead of fighting against your competition training, I want you to embrace it. Hannah looked confused. Staff Sergeant, I don't understand. Martinez led her back toward the firing line, but instead of returning to her original position, he directed her to a different section of the range, where various steel targets were set up for advanced training. Parker, I want you to forget everything about military marksmanship qualification for a moment. I want you to shoot the way you trained in competition. Hannah stared at him. Staff Sergeant, that's not how qualification works. Just trust me, Martinez said. He called out to the range safety officer, we're going to run some advanced training on the steel targets. Martinez handed Hannah a loaded magazine. Parker, I want you to engage those steel plates the way you would in a 3-gun competition. Don't think about military technique. Just shoot. Hannah looked at the steel targets arrayed at various distances, her competitive instincts beginning to awaken for the first time in months. Staff Sergeant, are you sure about this? Do it. Hannah chambered around and assumed a shooting stance that was subtly different from standard military positioning. Her weight distribution shifted, her grip adjusted, and her entire posture became more dynamic and fluid. She engaged the first target at 50 meters with a rapid double tap that sent both bullets ringing against the steel in quick succession. The sound was crisp and immediate, confirming perfect center hits. Moving smoothly to the next target at 75 meters, Hannah fired a controlled pair that struck the steel with mechanical precision. Her movements were flowing now, muscle memory taking over as years of competition training reasserted itself. The 100-meter targets fell to rapid, accurate fire that demonstrated the kind of marksmanship skills that very few soldiers ever developed. Hannah's shots were not just hitting the targets, they were striking with the kind of precision that competitive shooting demanded. By the time she had engaged all 12 steel targets, every shot had found its mark. The entire engagement had taken less than 30 seconds, and Hannah had demonstrated accuracy that exceeded anything most soldiers achieved during careful, deliberate qualification shooting. The other soldiers had stopped their own qualification to watch Hannah's demonstration. The range fell silent except for the ringing echoes of steel targets and Hannah's controlled breathing. Staff Sergeant Martinez was grinning. Parker, that was some of the best shooting I've ever seen. Now I want you to apply that confidence and muscle memory to the standard qualification targets. But don't change your fundamental shooting technique. Hannah looked at him uncertainly. Staff Sergeant, how do I do that? The qualification requires deliberate, timed fire. Parker, what if I told you that you could use your competition skills within the framework of military qualification? What if the problem isn't your shooting ability, but the artificial constraints you've been placing on yourself? Martinez had an idea that was as unconventional as it was brilliant. Parker, military marksmanship qualification doesn't specify how fast you have to shoot within the time limits. It only specifies that you have to hit the targets within the allowed time frame. Hannah began to understand where he was going. Staff Sergeant, are you suggesting that I shoot the qualification course using competition techniques? Exactly. Use your competition speed and accuracy, but apply it to military targets. Don't fight your training. Use it. 20 minutes later, Hannah was back on the firing line for her fourth qualification attempt. But this time, instead of trying to force herself into the slow, methodical rhythm of traditional military marksmanship, she allowed her competition training to guide her shooting. The 50-meter targets appeared, and Hannah engaged them with controlled pairs fired at competition speed. Her shots rang true, each target falling to precise rapid fire that demonstrated complete mastery of her weapon. The 100-meter targets received the same treatment. Hannah's muscle memory took over completely, and she found herself shooting with the fluid confidence that had once made her a national-level competitor. By the time she reached the challenging 300-meter targets, Hannah was operating in a zone of complete focus and competence. She engaged each target with the kind of precision that competitive shooting had ingrained in her over thousands of hours of practice. When the qualification was complete, Hannah had scored 38 hits out of 40 possible, achieving an expert rating that placed her among the top shooters in the battalion. Staff Sergeant Martinez was beaming as he reviewed her scorecard. "Parker, that was outstanding shooting. How do you feel?" Hannah was still processing what had just happened. "Staff Sergeant, I feel like myself again. For the first time since I enlisted, I felt like I was shooting the way I was trained to shoot." "Good," Martinez replied, "because now I have another challenge for you." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Staff Sergeant?" Martinez gestured toward the other soldiers in 3rd Platoon, many of whom were still struggling with their own qualification attempts. "Parker, I want you to coach them. I want you to help them improve their marksmanship using techniques that actually work, not just the standard methods that don't seem to be effective for everyone." Hannah looked at her fellow soldiers with new understanding. "Staff Sergeant, you want me to teach them competition techniques adapted for military qualification? I want you to teach them whatever works. You've just proven that unconventional approaches can produce exceptional results." Over the following 3 weeks, Hannah became the unofficial marksmanship coach for 3rd Platoon. She worked with soldiers who had been struggling with qualification, teaching them modified techniques that borrowed from competitive shooting while remaining within military standards. She taught them about natural point of aim, about trigger control that emphasized smooth press rather than deliberate squeeze, about breathing techniques that prioritized consistency over rigid timing. Most importantly, she taught them that confidence was as important as technique. The results were remarkable. Soldiers who had been barely qualifying began achieving marksman scores. Those who had been achieving marksman scores moved up to sharpshooter levels. The overall platoon average improved by 23% in just 3 weeks. Captain Rodriguez, the company commander, noticed the dramatic improvement and called Hannah into his office. "Specialist Parker," he began, "Staff Sergeant Martinez tells me you've been instrumental in improving our platoon marksmanship scores." Hannah stood at attention. "Yes, sir. I've been providing some coaching to soldiers who were having difficulty with qualification." Captain Rodriguez studied her personnel file. "Parker, your background shows no previous military marksmanship training, but Martinez says you demonstrate expert-level skills. How do you explain that?" Hannah had been dreading this conversation, but she was no longer ashamed of her competitive background. "Sir, I competed in civilian 3-gun competition before I enlisted. I have experience with precision marksmanship that translates to military applications." Captain Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "What level of competition?" "Grand Master level, sir. I competed nationally for 5 years." The captain was quiet for several moments, clearly impressed. "Parker, why isn't this background reflected in your military records?" "Sir, I chose not to emphasize my competitive shooting experience because I wanted to serve as a regular soldier, not as a marksmanship specialist." Captain Rodriguez nodded, understanding. "Parker, I appreciate that sentiment, but the Army needs to make the best use of all its soldiers' talents. Your marksmanship skills are clearly exceptional, and your ability to teach those skills to other soldiers is valuable." Hannah remained at attention, unsure where this conversation was heading. Captain Rodriguez continued, "I'm recommending you for assignment to the battalion marksmanship training cadre. You would become a certified Army marksmanship instructor and help train soldiers throughout the brigade." Hannah felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. Sir, would this change my military occupational specialty?
Yes, Parker, you would be reclassified as a marksmanship instructor, but you would remain in your current unit. Think of it as additional skill identifier rather than a complete career change.
Hannah considered this opportunity. Teaching marksmanship would allow her to use her competitive background in service to her country, while helping other soldiers develop skills that could save their lives in combat situations. Sir, I accept the assignment. 6 months later, Specialist Hannah Parker stood on the firing line at Fort Carson's Advanced Marksmanship Range, wearing the instructor badge that marked her as a certified Army marksmanship trainer. In front of her, a class of 30 soldiers from various units throughout the brigade was practicing advanced shooting techniques that incorporated elements of both competitive shooting and military marksmanship. Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had been promoted and assigned as her assistant instructor, approached during a training break. Specialist Parker, how are the new students progressing? Hannah smiled, watching her soldiers apply the technique she had taught them. Staff Sergeant, 28 of 30 are now shooting expert or sharpshooter scores. The other two have improved significantly from their baseline. Martinez nodded approvingly. Outstanding. You know, Parker, I never properly thanked you for what you taught me that day on the range. Hannah looked at him with curiosity. What did I teach you, Staff Sergeant? You taught me that sometimes the best way to help someone succeed isn't to force them into a standard mold, but to find ways to let their natural abilities shine through. Hannah considered this insight. Staff Sergeant, I think what I learned is that trying to hide your talents doesn't serve anyone, including yourself. My competitive background wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was a resource that could help other soldiers. As Hannah watched her students continue their practice, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had spent months fighting against her own abilities, convinced that her competitive shooting background was incompatible with military service. But she had learned that excellence, regardless of its origin, could always find a way to serve a greater purpose. Her competitive shooting skills hadn't made her unsuitable for military service. They had made her uniquely qualified to help other soldiers achieve their own potential. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a former student. Instructor Parker, use the techniques you taught us during deployment. Your training probably saved lives today. Thank you. Hannah smiled as she put her phone away. She wasn't hiding anymore, and she wasn't apologizing for her abilities. She was exactly where she belonged, using every skill she had developed to make other soldiers more effective and more confident. The woman who had once earned the cruel nickname Anchor had become one of the Army's most sought-after marksmanship instructors, proving that sometimes our greatest weaknesses are just strengths that haven't found their proper application.